If you like the video, then please consider supporting Slope's Game Room on Patreon. Here we are. The time has finally come. Shinobi. Easily one of Sega's most important characters, after Sonic the Hedgehog of course. Heck, he even served as the company's mascot of sorts once upon a time, but we'll get to that in due course. Shinobi for me was a huge part of my childhood, starting with his third game in the series, Revenge of Shinobi, and in my opinion is without a doubt one of the greatest games ever made. But this is far from the whole story. Shinobi has walked a long path in his video game journey, and today I aim to cover everything from the creation and inspiration to the cameos and of course the games. So join me and Joe Masachi as we look into the complete history of video games' greatest assassin, Shinobi. Welcome to Slope's Game Room. During the 80s and late 70s in all honesty, Kung Fu movies became big business in the movie industry. It got so out of hand that ninjas became quite the staple in American and UK culture. Village halls disguised as dojos started popping up everywhere, and school kids claiming that their dad could have your dad because he trained with Bruce Lee were being spread across the playground. Either way, what I'm trying to get at, the world of Kung Fu was massive, and thankfully, gaming found its fair share of Kung Fu related titles, such as the obviously named Kung Fu, and the personal favourite Yaya Kung Fu, which I played on, you guessed it, the Amstrad CPC 464. It was about this time in 1986 to be exact that Yutaka Sugano joined Sega of Japan and started working on a game that would cash in on this huge phenomenon. A mere 1 year later in 1987, using the Sega System 16 hardware, Shinobi was released to the arcades. And it was very much inspired by this game Rolling Thunder, released by Namco a year earlier. You play as Joe Masachi. Yes, sadly all those thoughts by me as a youngster and I'm sure quite a few others around the world, you're not playing as Shinobi. In fact, the video game's greatest ninja has the standard name Joe. But I suppose that was the theme for the time. Shinobi is in fact simply another name for ninja. So much so that the kanji character used behind the title is used for both the words shinobi and ninja, and can also mean endurance, stamina or patience. Anyway, Joe Masachi, that's you, has one job: to save the children from the terrorist organisation known as Zed. And damn, there is a lot of them. But that's to be expected. The game was designed for the arcades and obviously wanted you to pump as much of your moolah into the machine as possible. However, get good at the game and you actually feel awesome playing it. You feel like a ninja, a shinobi. With this being an arcade game, the game is actually completable in about 20 minutes or so. The end of the level finds you chasing this Shredder-like looking character before you move on to more of what looks like the same. The references don't stop there because you've also got a character that looks like it's taken straight out of the Amazing Spider-Man. Cool little bonus stages like the one you're seeing here are played in between stages. The game is great fun, even by today's standards, and thankfully has been ported to literally everything. In fact, my first experience with the game was on the Amstrad CPC, which is actually pretty damn good as far as home computer conversions go, and is a lot more faithful than other Sega conversions. It was also ported to the PC Engine, Amiga, Atari ST, Commodore 64, ZX Spectrum, IBM PC, MSX, and in recent year consoles such as the PS3, Wii Virtual Console, Xbox 360 and mobile phones, which is by far the most unique of the ports with a completely different art style, which ends up being far closer to the most recent games in the series. But we're a long way away from those yet. Tengen even made a version for the Famicom that is really exactly as you would expect. It feels like a NES game, and it plays like a NES game. However, if you ask me, other than playing the arcade game, the best version can be found on the Master System. It's not as fast paced, sure, but the awesome thing about it is that it feels like its own game entirely. A worthy addition to any Master System collection. a huge graphical overhaul was put into place for the very next instalment in the Shinobi franchise, with Shadow Dancer, and it was released in the arcades in 1989. This game is the only true sequel to the classic arcade game ever released in the arcades. That's right, Shinobi only ever got 2 games officially in the arcades. So before we look at the highest point in the series on the Mega Drive, let's look at this game. This is Shadow Dancer, created on the upgraded Sega System 18 hardware, and it's obvious, even at first glance, where that extra power went. Sure, it only came out 2 years after the original, but the graphical jump between the 2 games is damn noticeable. You'll also notice that the forgettable unmasked ninja from the first game has had a bit of an overhaul and looks more like that sexy Mega Drive ninja that we'll be talking about shortly. The reason for this is because you're not actually playing as Joe in this game, but instead you're playing as Hayate, his son, and it's set several years into the future. You will also notice that young Hayate also has a companion dog, going by the name of Yamato, and he's used to attack enemies at your command for a quick takedown. Everything I just mentioned ends up giving the game a good unique feel on an already winning gameplay style. You see, the rest of the game is basically just the same. Sure, you've got different areas, you defuse bombs now rather than saving children, but it's the same gameplay style as before, which is fine by me. If you enjoyed this game, then you're probably going to love this game. Your special ability has had an upgrade too this time, which is good considering the ridiculous boss you're going to end up going against. You know, the gun shooting train? But don't you worry, we haven't seen the most ridiculous of the bosses yet. Several ports of the game were made as expected, and Shadow Dancer for the Master System is bloody incredible. Just look at this. This game is on a bloody Master System. How good does this look for an 8-bit system? Well, it's a shame, because it sucks. I mean, it's not unplayable, hell no, but the game is so bloody choppy with awkward controls that it's unbearable to play. But hey, at least it looks nice, right? And I suppose it actually does have a kick-ass soundtrack. Several home ports of this game also came up by US Gold. Oh dear. Yeah, moving on. Now, like I said, this was the last time Shinobi hit the arcades, but actually the fans are divided as whether this is actually the second or the third game in the series. You see, Shadow Dancer did technically come out a whole month before Revenge of Shinobi did on the Mega Drive, but looking as it's more of a continuation of the story, let alone you're actually playing as Joe Masachi in this one, gets people to believe that this is the true sequel. Look, second game or not, who cares? I'm not going to convince you either way, so work it out yourself. The timeline of Shinobi gets a lot more complicated from here on out. So, with that sort of out the way for now, let me quickly paint a picture for you. You live in Japan, and you get one of these bad boys on day of release, October 10, 1988. What do you do when you get a new console? Well, normally you buy a few games, with at least 2 of them being first party, right? Well, you're in luck, because you don't actually have to try too hard to work out what game you're going to choose. Because on day of release, lucky Mega Drive early adopters got to choose from this or this. And that's it. Now, I'm sure for the time this was great, but if you ask me, it's aged quite badly. I've never been that big of a fan of this game. Now, this on the other hand was a great first game to get for your system, but sadly, it is quite a short burst of fun sort of game. Let's be honest, what you really want is a game that feels a bit more meaty. You know where I'm going with this. Well, after games like Altered Beast, Super Hang-On, Rambo 3 and Forgotten Worlds, those lucky Sega early adopters got to choose 2 pretty incredible games that Christmas. You got Golden Axe, and you've got the Super Shinobi, which is the Japanese name for Revenge of Shinobi. In my opinion, the first great must-own game for one of the greatest retro game systems that ever graced our mad little world. And in my opinion, this beauty still stands in the library's top 3 games ever made. Not bad going for such an early release if you ask me. Noriyosha Oba was the guy who was primarily responsible for the amazing follow-up. His aim was to make a game that really did show off the system's hardware. The original arcade game, as good as it was really quite a simple game, which is fine considering it was made to be understood instantly. However, Revenge of Shinobi was aimed to be more complex. The graphics had to be pushed, and after seeing how well sequels to arcade hits had already worked out for Sega, they thought long and hard about how exactly they was going to do the same thing here. Health points. This was one of the first things to change. No more hostages, instead you need to save your girlfriend. Well, I suppose you need to save at least one hostage then, but yeah, whatever. Bombs do make a return in this game, but they are to be avoided at all costs. The game has 8 levels, a new double jump used to reach higher levels, and to go between the foreground and the background. And let's not forget to spray the level with your classic shurikens. You now have 4 special power-ups at your disposal, which range from blowing up everything on the screen, which loses you a life. There's one for improving your jump ability. You got a sort of lightning wall thing, and my personal favourite, an upgrade of your weapons. The game is full of memorable moments that will stick with you, like they have done for me, forever. You got the ninja fight in the nightclub, the first oversized sprite ninja boss traversing the rooftops, the weird robot brain boss thing, the car dodging highway stage, and of course the utterly fantastic, brilliant music by Yuzo Koshiro of Streets of Rage fame. He's back again to create one of the very best soundtracks, not just on this system, but of all time. And we are far done from the crazy moments that have stood out in my mind in this game. Because depending on what version you had, there are 4 revisions in total, there was some pretty questionable trademark stealing put in place. Remember that Spider-Man looking character from the first game? Well, I suppose you could say, yeah, he's just a guy in red and blue climbing a wall. No big deal, that could be anyone, right? Well, try denying this boss. Well, what about the Terminator? Rambo? Batman? And of course, one of the ultimate I can't believe what I'm seeing, almost shit myself moments in my gaming life, Godzilla. I think it's safe to say that if you can defeat Batman, Spider-Man, Rambo, the Terminator and bloody Godzilla, you're a force to be reckoned with. Like I said, a fair few changes were made here over the 5 different revisions of the game. Version 1.00, the original, versions 1.01, 1.02 and 1.03 on the original consoles, most notably on compilation discs, and finally version 1.04 on the Wii Virtual Console, and likely in all future ports as well. So here are the differences. Rambo changes to a bald guy in every version after that original. Spider-Man most definitely has the biggest change in the original. He looks like this, and in the 2 later revisions, they changed him to look more like Spider-Man, until the final revision was changed to literally just being some weird purple guy. The reason for the change is that Sega actually went to Marvel to get the rights after the game came out, which they managed to get. And obviously that time has run its course, hence the reason that he's now purple. But that's not the only change. Ever noticed how Spider-Man and Batman have never been seen in the same room as each other? Well, that's obviously because Spider-Man is Batman. Well, only in the original. In every other version after the original, Batman goes bye-bye and instead we get the Wing Bat. There's also some random slight differences as to whether Spider-Man shoots webs in front of you or behind you depending on what version you get, but that's not very interesting. However, what is interesting is the fact that the Terminator, strangely enough, never changes, and that Godzilla character stayed too. Well, for versions 1.00, 1.01 and 1.02, after this he was turned into a skeleton dinosaur sort of thing. Damn, Sega, you did not give a crap who you pissed off when unleashing the biggest saving grace for the system onto the world, did ya? Well, whatever happened here, it worked. I literally couldn't believe my luck. What other fantastic movie or character from my childhood was he going to go up against next? One of the biggest ballsy moves from Sega, if you ask me, and at least in my case, it definitely worked. Not only is The Revenge of Shinobi a great game in my eyes, it's one of the most important games for the system that really did help move units before the greatest pack-in game of all time was unleashed on the world. To this day, ask someone that has played the majority of classic Shinobi games and Revenge of Shinobi will be right up there at the top of the list. If you've never played a Shinobi game, definitely give this one a go. Or you could try this one. Shinobi 3 Return of the Ninja. But this game came out a whole 3 years after this gen. What happened to Shinobi between these games? Haha, sorry angry commenters that jumped the gun. The reason I didn't mention the Mega Drive version of Shadow Dancer is not just to show you lot up, but more importantly, I think it deserves its own personal review. This game is completely different to this game. Sure, it has the same character and the same awesome dog mechanic, but it's different in several ways. Firstly, depending on what version you play as, you may actually be playing as good old Joe Musashi again. But that's in the English version. Japanese gamers played as Hotsuma. Maybe they thought that our young English minds couldn't handle a complex storyline of playing as his son. Heck, they could be right. Like I said, I thought his name was Shinobi, and when the games were reported, they messed that up too. In the Master System version, he was known as Takashi in the manual, and Fuma in the game, whilst all those home computer remakes also think you're playing as Joe Musashi himself. Anyway, who cares? We all know you're playing as his son. So, onto the Mega Drive version.
人間を操る史上最強の忍者剣山シャドウダンサーザ・シークレット・オブ・シノビ
So this game is actually great fun. The dog attack has a slightly different way of playing and now forces you to hold a button down which fills up a gauge that then attacks an enemy. I personally prefer this option as it means you don't and can't overuse him. A few new stages have also been added. You're back to saving hostages rather than defusing bombs. A few of the levels designs have been overhauled to give the game some extra weight, and the overall look and the redesign of the game just feels more like a classic 16-bit era brawler. So, all in all, it's not as good as this game or the next one, but it is still a damn fun time. If you are a fan of Shinobi, it's still 100% worth a look. Just don't expect it to be as good as these games. Right, that's enough about Shadow Dancer. Let's move on to Shinobi 3. For me, this game is the best in the series, but that's really just nostalgia rearing its beautiful head. Shinobi 3 Return of the Ninja Master is technically probably the best game in the series. And you know what? I can't deny it. It's still a bloody good game, with a kick-ass soundtrack might I add too. So like I said, this game came out several years after The Revenge of Shinobi on the Mega Drive, and thankfully you can see a vast improvement in the graphics. They are absolutely stunning in my opinion, and they stand up as some of the very best looking games to ever grace the system. The gameplay somehow manages to feel faster thanks to Joe's new running ability, but most importantly it feels and just controls a little bit better than the two games before it. Playing Shinobi in this game feels great. You can jump off walls, hang from the ceiling, do some double jumping, blocking enemies' attacks and even taking down enemies from the sky. All of this really does make you feel more like a Shinobi whilst playing. Honestly, I'm not a big fan of watching Let's Plays, but when you watch someone that has mastered these controls in a game like Shinobi 3, well, it's damn good. 7 brand new levels grace us in the game, such as forest theme levels, caves, military bases, and even spooky alien-like levels. Levels where you're on the back of horses, motorised surfboards, and of course, like every other game in the genre, elevator stages. Crazy bosses also make their way into this release and require you to have far more faster reflexes. However, just like all games like this, you will soon be able to work out the pattern and defeat them. The bosses in fact are actually one of the best things about the game. You literally never know what you're going to be going up against. How about jumping brains, or whatever this thing is? They are so bizarre for a ninja themed game. Be sure to give this game a go on one of the many releases that are out there. Besides, it's the only way you're going to be able to fight a Mecha Godzilla for the second time with freaking laser beams attached to its nipples? Now, considering Shinobi 3 is probably the best game in the series, it seemed to have quite a troubled development, with magazines at the time showing completely different sections that didn't end up in the game. Thankfully, a couple of ROMs do exist online that can sort of be played that do show off these areas. So if you fancy looking more into that, I most definitely suggest booting up the emulator of your choice and giving them a go. Another strange thing regarding this game is the name, Shinobi 3. That makes sense, right? It's the third game in the series. You got Shinobi, Revenge of Shinobi, and then Shinobi 3, Return of the Ninja. Let's forget this one. However, not so much in Japan. The game is called simply the Super Shinobi 2, meaning it's a direct sequel to the classic Revenge of Shinobi game, which is called the Super Shinobi out there. Whatever you want to call it, and whatever version you decide to get, you're in for a good time. Which is more than I can say for the Cyber Shinobi. The bad vibes start straight away after you look at the box art being called the Cyber Shinobi, and then the title screen being called Shinobi Part 2. So, the Cyber Shinobi, what's it like? Well, it's crap. Not only does Shinobi get a bloody gun and some grenades in this one, I think it's obvious to all who are watching that it not only looks horrific, even by Master System standards, but plays horrifically too. 6 surprisingly long and very boring stages greet you, and you end up going after some pretty ridiculous bosses. Yes, even more ridiculous than the ones we've already seen. Sure, by this point a submarine and a helicopter might not sound too mental, but a bulldozer? Sorry, scrub that. A bulldozer that looks like it's been drawn by my 1-year-old son? Yeah, I think this one might end up near the top of the mental scale, am I right? Look guys, just don't bother with this one. It's a huge step back for the series. And besides, we'd already established by this point that Shinobi can be ported to the Master System, and pretty damn well. So, let's finally move on to Shinobi, aka the GG Shinobi, and Shinobi 2, the Silent Fury, aka the GG2 Shinobi for the Game Gear. Are you hearing that? Classic Yuzo Koshiro music. And you know what? The games are surprisingly great. Okay, so the first biggest change is the fact that in the game, you're actually playing as 5 different ninjas. Why? Because they all have slightly different abilities. Think Mega Man and you're on the right track. You obviously have your usual main guy, Joe Masashi, but you also have one that can throw bombs, one that attacks enemies with energy blasts, one has a grappling hook, and finally one that wields shurikens. But that's only at first glance. You will notice other tricks that these extra characters have, like some being able to walk on water, one of them being able to do a suicide attack, and one of them turning into a tornado, and so much more. The gameplay is pretty much spot on, and follows on from the classic Revenge of Shinobi games, with 5 levels that in some cases look like the classic game, but actually are all redesigned exclusively for this game. As you boot up the game, you get to choose one of the first 4 levels, and in each level you save one of the Shinobis, and then you move on to the next level, and when you're in that extra level you press start and you can change into them. Obviously, with only being 5 levels, the game is sort of on the short side, but making you choose the right path really does make the game extremely replayable. Not to just find out what these extra Shinobis can do, but also to work out which one you should get first. And also, the game gets pretty damn hard, pretty damn quickly. So studying these tactics of all of the different Shinobis is a real must. Anyway, you save all 4 and you move on to the final stage to go up against this thing. If you're a fan of the franchise and fancy a game that is quite a challenge, be sure to pick this one up. It's great fun. And thankfully, so is Shinobi 2 the Silent Ninja, aka the GG2 Shinobi. It's basically the same as the last game, with finding those 4 coloured ninjas. However, in this version, you also need to find crystals that are hidden around the stages before advancing. Sometimes these crystals are in hard to reach areas that result in you having to go back to get the right ninja to then reach that particular level. A great couple of games here that stand on their own in my opinion. Go and check them out if you've got a chance. For our next game on the list, we need to move forward a generation with the Sega Saturn. Shin Shinobi Den, which translates to New Shinobi Story as it was known in Japan, was renamed Shinobi Legions in America and Shinobi X for European audiences. This game is almost good. It's sad to see franchises try and make the jump from 16-bit to 32-bit, and for the time sure they probably looked better, but sadly they end up taking a few steps back in the gameplay department. Let me just confirm, this isn't a bad game. In fact, the game almost feels like a follow-up to Shinobi 3, which is a good thing, right? Well, sadly it's really just not quite there, resulting in sort of sluggish controls and a far more slower game. Now looking at it, I really do like the art style. I like the cheesy intro movie and the cutscenes. I like the fact that certain points of the world are destructible. Hell, dare I say it, I even like the digitised characters. It's not better, but I really do like this version trying something new, which they pretty much get right. Now the reason I'm a lot more forgiving on this game than perhaps I should be is the fact you're not playing as Joe Masashi. In this one, you're playing as Sho, a different ninja, with a far slower, sort of different style of the game. As an example, for the first time, the game has assigned the sword and the shurikens as separate buttons, which results in you spending a lot more time blocking and rebounding enemy attacks. All in all, it's most definitely worth checking out, even for curiosity's sake. However, the game does go for about 80 or 90 quid for a UK box copy, 60 or 70 quid for a US copy, and 10 to 20 quid for a Japanese copy. Further cementing the fact that having a Sega Saturn that plays imports is the only way to go if you're collecting. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, some of the bosses in this game, they just do not disappoint. So let's look at what happens when a beloved franchise, and even worse, a beloved game, gets handed over to a crap company. The Revenge of Shinobi by 3D6 Games has nothing to do with the Revenge of Shinobi for the Genesis. It's crap. They even got the name wrong. In this game, you're actually playing as Shinobi. No, I don't actually mean a Shinobi. In this game, your name is Shinobi. I think it's pretty obvious to all that 3D6 put pretty much no time into actually researching the Shinobi franchise before making this game. But even with the game crapping over the franchise story and lore, the gameplay doesn't save it either, as you spend 90% of your time looking for keys and then going into identical looking houses, smashing every vase and pot you come up against to find little trinkets that will help you continue through the game. There is hardly any fighting involved in the game, and although it sort of looks okay I suppose for a Game Boy Advance title, overall it's just a really boring standard ninja game that literally could have been called anything. Sadly in this instance, not only did it brand itself with the Shinobi name, but it went one step further and named itself after Revenge of Shinobi. The second worst game in this series. God damn, I hated this game. Thankfully 3D6 Games, after making both a horrible Shinobi and Altered Beast game, to be fair in my opinion Sega should just give up on this one, did in fact stop destroying classic Sega franchises and put their focus into math-based iOS games. But more importantly, they didn't kill the franchise, because the very same year in 2002, Shinobi got a full reboot in the 3D space, and it fully stands up in my opinion as one of the most successful reboots in gaming, simply titled Shinobi.
Rated M for mature. Where is he?
Shinobi's back!
Sega!
This has nothing to do with the arcade game that came out 15 years before it. In fact, you don't even play as Joe Masashi in this one. Instead, you're playing as Hotsuma. The game came out at the perfect time on the PlayStation 2, right slap bang in the middle. Game companies have really got to grips with what they was able to do with the system, and this game, even though it was almost 15 years old itself, still looks good and it's damn fun to play. Damn fun, but damn hard too. My god, this game is unforgivingly hard, which makes it actually quite hard to recommend. If you put the time into it, you will be rewarded for doing so. But after those initial first two fairly easy levels, the game ramps up the difficulty so much that it becomes at time almost impossible. Expect to make your way through plenty of DualShock 2s with this one. The way that Hotsuma runs, jumps and attacks his enemies can be quite breathtaking at times. And for anybody watching, not just the screen, your fingers are going to be flicking all over the controls as both analog, shoulders and face buttons need to be used simultaneously. Combos play a big part in this game, as you will not so quickly learn that the more you do, the more powerful your sword becomes throughout. This is even more required when you're going up against the game's bosses, which by the way are exactly what you would expect leading up to this point. The same can be said for its sequel, Nightshade, released 2 years later. Now, other than the game featuring a female ninja this time, named Tanuchi, and that quality red scar from the last game now being changed for a white one, there really isn't much else to say here. The game does have a nice little practice mode attached to it, which would hopefully suck in a few of those new players, making the combos slightly easier to bear, but really, the game is still relentlessly hard. These are only worth picking up, like I say, if you've got the time to put into them. So, what was next for the Shinobi franchise? Well, Sega gave the franchise yet again to another studio in 2011. This time it was handed to Kryptonite Games. They decided in their infinite wisdom to create the 4th game in the series to simply be called Shinobi. That is, unless you live in Japan, then it's called Shinobi 3D. Yep, Shinobi for the 3DS is that game that you always see for about £2. And if you're like me, you think, ugh, it's obvious shovelware. Well, I'm here to tell you that we are all wrong. Next time you see this game, go and pick it up. It's dirt cheap and bloody good. And you'll be glad to find that the game has gone back to its roots in the gameplay arena, but this time going for a more 2.5D feel similar to games such as Ultimate Ghouls and Ghosts and Pandemonium. What you end up getting is another excellent game that is very much obviously taking inspiration, yet again, from this beauty. The game's story is all over the place, starting in old school Japan before heading to the future to defeat submarines and whatnot, but that's what Shinobi's been about since the beginning. You will often find the game change the angle and the gameplay to sometimes mix things up a bit, which thankfully breathes new life into the Shinobi franchise. It has some fantastic level designs that rival even some of the better games before it, and it's so fast paced towards the end of the game that it's really going to be putting your platforming abilities to the test. Especially when you're going up against a robotic shark. Sadly, even with the new 3DS, the 3D effect in the game can sometimes hinder your enjoyment rather than complement it. But gimmicky 3D rubbish aside, turn that slider off and you've got a great game here. It's still worth picking up. For me, it's easily the biggest surprise in this franchise. Well, actually the biggest surprise in the franchise is no doubt Alex Kidd in Shinobi World, which I already covered in detail in my Alex Kidd episode. You see this? Click it, and you can check it out yourself. Now for the final game in this pretty much great in all instances franchise, you have Shinobi 2 for Chinese mobile phones. Thankfully, the spin-off does not have you playing as Joe Masashi, and instead you are playing as Honoka, and everything about it feels further away from the Shinobi franchise than any game before it. Well, okay, perhaps not this one. Shinobi 2's music is far more upbeat, and the gameplay is far more simple, and well, it's just boring. Yep, even taken out of the formula that this is a Shinobi game, in my opinion, it barely qualifies as any sort of ninja style game whatsoever. It's the most basic form of gameplay of any type of platformer. It is quite an interesting entry for the franchise, but sadly it is also one of the worst. But when you do take out Shinobi 2, the Cyber Ninja and the Game Boy Advance release of The Revenge of Shinobi, what you are left with is an entire franchise of games that are pretty much all solid games in their own right. With the only argument being which one is the best, and that is never a bad argument to have. Now, other than the games, Joe Masashi can also be seen making an appearance in the Sonic All-Star Racing games with his own track. He is also playable in the original game's Tiger LCD port, and if that's still not enough, he even took over the show in a few old school Sonic the Comics. So, if you are after a new set of games to play from Sega that you can really dig your teeth into, then I suggest going in search of Shinobi. Hopefully this video has shown you all that even with one real game in the last decade, that we have not forgotten about Shinobi. Please Sega, don't give up on the greatest video game ninja that you created.
Hey there guys, thanks for checking out the video. I want to give a big special shout out to all of my Patreons, but first an extra special shout out goes to Ryan Burford, Gary Pinkett, Andrew Dalton, Brent Craft, Joe Lazares, Ian A. Chapman, Phil Lowlins, Video Game Basement, Hernandez, Retro to Nextgen, Garzagor, Cielski, Samuel Victor, Red the Beard, John Fuller, Michael, Conrad Constantine, Pretendo64, Mike Fallon, Gavin Gorves, Creamy Elephant, James Loveridge, Casey Garner, Blitz Hedgie, Ben Hall, Gemma at Mr. T-Shirts, Wiki Studios, Marcus King Emo, Cut Tyndall, June, Rob Jenkins, The Geeky Dad, Richard Carter, aka Fantastic Dizzy, Dunder Control, Todd Paul Float G, Petty Mew, and Brian Rawson. If you want to be part of this list, get your name shouted out, get your name shown, come and see what I'm working on and all of that other awesome stuff, then please click the link that you see on the screen. Don't forget to subscribe, give it a thumbs up, a thumbs down, whatever you prefer. But for now, this is DJ Slope signing out, and hopefully I'll see you all next time.